In this video, I'll be making a hardtop for my Miata using the convertible frame as a buck. Here's the stock Miata convertible top frame. I've welded up the factory joints to prevent them from being flexible. I have added in a couple of spots on the corners a separate removable piece that I'll use as a buck to help me shape the metal, and then I'll remove that before I put windows in there. I added some additional support in here where I knew that I would not necessarily need windows. This is basically directly behind your head, and so if I can put a window in here, put a window in there, and then something similar on the other side, I think I'll still have reasonable visibility. I shaped a piece of metal along the bottom to fit the Miata body as I have changed it. The stock cockpit is quite deep. It comes, oh gosh, like back to here or something, which is not going to work on my body. So this will be the new bottom. It's 18 gauge steel, and it's just been shaped to fit, and I hope the sheet metal will lie along here very nicely. And I've added some more support along the fronts because the stock hardtops on a Miata stick out quite a bit at the B pillar down here. I was surprised how much that top really needs to come out so that water isn't going to just run straight down into the cockpit. I've also marked off in a couple of areas with tape points which I will use for my paper patterning, and then I'll have the sheet metal fit those same areas, and then it'll be easy to transfer to the other side. For a little bit more detail about the paper pattern, I picked areas that I thought were easy to mirror from one side to the other. So for example, on the driver's side, I put my tape edge 7 inches from the side of the top frame. That'll be easy to transfer to the other side. At the rear, I just picked this mount for the convertible top, which I'm sure is the same on a factory top from one side to the other. So I just came over 1.5 inches, and then I'll make sure that my paper pattern comes to there, and therefore when I transfer this to the metal will also go to there. I'll note too, when I put a piece of paper on top of this top frame, it wants to wrinkle up along the sides, and the idea here is that the metal is going to need to be raised in the center in relation to the edges to be able to conform to the shape of the top. Here's our first piece before bashing. We need to add shape through the center of this panel. We could use a wheeling machine or a hammer or a power hammer or whatever happens to be available. To me, the shortest route to happiness is a big hammer. The bigger the better. And so I'm going to use that, because remember, this is about having fun, not necessarily building a top. That first round of bashing got it pretty close. I've got it clamped in position on here. I have a Sharpie marker 3/4 of an inch from the edge, and I'll use that each time I put the piece of metal back on the frame that I'm using like a buck. I'll just make sure that I put it in the same place. The pieces of tape are my other reference points to help me make sure that I'm consistent every time I put the metal back on here to check the fit. It fits actually surprisingly well along here, which is hilarious for how lumpy it is. We've got some waves along here that's telling me that's extra. If I can trap these with a big wooden mallet, I can shrink them. I can also use any of the shrinking tools, like you may have an Eastwood tool. There's going to be a bend along here. I can just bend that over probably a big hammerhead or my thigh, and that ought to roll this over pretty nice. So we'll take a look at the back and see how it looks. A little bit harder to film than I thought, but this is the area where we're trying to make sure it fits. The deepest part of the panel seems to fit pretty well, even after one good pass of bashing. Maybe some of the wrinkles are a little bit more clear from this side too. Those are just little areas that need some shrinking, and I can either shrink them by trapping the wrinkles against a stump with a wood mallet is a good choice, or I could use one of the mini shrinking tools like a Eastwood tool, or certainly an Eckold hand former, or any number of tools would work. Then I will also need to smooth this out. I can smooth it out either with a spoon against a stake or a dolly, or I could certainly wheel it if that is available to me, or I could hammer it against a steel slab with a hammer from the backside. Any of those ways will work to get it smooth. In looking at this a little bit closer from another angle, I can see I've got quite a bit of extra material along in here. That's what that wave represents, and so I think I'll put a couple of wrinkles in here manually and try to trap those to shrink that more. The liposuction that took place along here by shrinking those two wrinkles really helped a lot. Now I need to just smooth this out more. Some options for smoothing would be I could use the wood mallet against a homemade stake like so. This is a piece of a pipe cap that's been cut out and mounted on the stump. I could smooth out the big lumps with this. I can also hit it from the back according to whatever would seem to get the best results. I could use a steel spoon similarly against a stake, and that could be held in a vise if you didn't have something like this. You could also just use an auto body dolly set on top of a shot bag and planish against that. You could hammer against a hunk of steel. This is just a steel plate with another hammer to smooth it out. Of course, that's going to leave little hammer marks. That's sort of how I made the aluminum track nose that I did some other videos of. Or, of course, you could wheel it. Wheeling it would be the easiest and give you the fastest and best results, but not everyone has one of those, and it could still be done with just hand tools if that's what you have. I have a 8.5-inch radius or full radius wheel in here. This is a good choice for this panel because I think it'll fit. Either way, I decide to roll it. The direction really isn't going to matter that much. It's more that I work it evenly to make sure that I don't put any new lumps in there and I smooth out what I've got. After some more wheeling, I got the panel to fit. What you're going for with this kind of thing is you'd love to have a really nice fit where there isn't any tension, the panel isn't fighting you, it's not rubbing anywhere, it just has a nice clean kind of accurate fit there. On this piece I had to stretch quite a bit along in here where the metal was hitting that leading edge of the frame. I noticed also on the stock frame, it did this on one side but not the other. One of the little joints stuck up rather prominently. I'm kind of surprised it didn't pop through on the fabric. Maybe it did. My top was so bad I couldn't tell. But anyway, so I ground that off and I can paint it before I put the aluminum over. And then the other thing, if you're trying to get a panel that looks really clean, if you have, the more natural light you have, the better. I have have a couple of wheels, but one of them is set up in such a way that it's right in front of a door to the backyard, and that is very helpful to look at the play of light down the length of the panel, and it will, as it's getting shinier and you're removing lumps and whatnot, you get a feel for how accurate it is. You can always hit it from the back with a hammer for the instantaneous gratification of raising the metal, or you can more carefully tease any low areas up until the whole thing is even. There we go, ready for the next panel. For the second panel, I'll do this corner piece here. I made a paper pattern and cut a piece of metal. The way it rocks on here suggests to me that it's highest at this point. So I want to raise that part, and then I can just anticipate that as I raise this, there'll be some wrinkles that would want to form along that bottom edge, and so I think I'll just go ahead and shrink that because I see it in the future, and then we'll see where that gets us. This second panel went quite quickly using my favorite method, which is bash it with a hammer. I raised this area in the center according to the rocking that I was getting with the flat piece. I made some big wrinkles along the bottom, just like did a little of that on the first piece. Shrank those into the stump. Did a few other little shrinks on those two edges, and didn't take long to get it to where it sits on there pretty good. Now I just need to smooth it out. And again, I could either wheel that, or I could hit it with a hammer from the backside against a flat piece of steel. I ran this second panel through the wheel, and boy, it just didn't take but a couple of minutes to clean up most of the hammer marks from that, so that was nice. This third panel will be adjacent to that corner panel. It looks like, again, no big surprise, really low crown panel, needs some shape right there in the middle. I wouldn't be surprised if somewhere on this corner we'll have to do a little shrinking, but I think that'll be pretty straightforward. I got pretty cavalier with this one. It kind of looks like an angry chicken attacked it up in the corner. That's a steel hammer against a steel surface. I can work on that, but anyway, it sure moves material pretty quickly. I had to do a little bit of shrinking along here. A lot of that will get cut off. Almost all of this will get cut off because I anticipate putting a weld seam somewhere up here with that other panel that comes down. A little bit of shrinking right there. My steel frame is kind of high there. That's all my fault, but oh well. I don't think anyone's going to say anything, so there we go. We can do a little more finishing. I think that'll be done. A view from the underside of the top frame gives you the best idea of where the shape needs to happen on the roof skin that runs down the middle. When I'm satisfied with the way these panels fit together, I can mark them and weld them. I have not tried to take out the bumps, but I can still work it even after they've been welded. So I've got them clamped in position. I'll take this scribe, try to make one line like so, make a couple of registration marks across there. So that there'll be only one place where this can truly fit. And that'll make for an accurate fit up. A lot of this extra that can get cut off because the other panel is going to cover it. I went ahead and welded these 3 panels together and then went over the weld seam a little bit with a Vixen file, and I think we're ready to move on. I made the big center panel that runs down the middle with the wheeling machine, and then I welded it to the side pieces that I had already completed. Now I'm going to work on these weld seams a little bit. It helps a lot if you use some machinist Dicom that you can spray on. This is kind of a truth revealer, which can be a little bit painful sometimes, but luckily the fumes coming off of this are pretty great and can help you forget whatever shortcomings you think you have after you've revealed the truth by filing. A Vixen file works quite well for figuring out what your highs and lows look like as you go to address the weld seam. So I'll take care of those next. The last panel is the one across the back where there will be a large window, so most of this will get cut out, but I figured the easiest way to figure out how that window ought to be is just start with some clean metal on there. So I'm going to take this flat piece and put a little crown in it with the wheel, and that'll probably work out pretty nice. This panel across the rear of the top doesn't have much shape in it at all. I've got a 52-inch radius wheel in here, and I think it's probably going to take maybe one pass across or possibly across and back, and that'll probably be about all it takes for that little bit of shape. Then once it's welded in, I'll be able to stretch out the welds to the adjacent panels so that it all transitions really nicely across the back of the top. So probably a little bit hard to evaluate on here, but a little bit of shape happening. That'll probably be good. I ended up going across this a total of 3 times. 1, 2, 3 with a 52-inch radius wheel. Doesn't have much crown, but it has some. That seemed to be just about the right amount. I think this top part, where it needs to meet up with a bar that's part of the factory top, I believe I could just hammer that over a stake with a mallet to get that to fit there. I think that'll probably fit up pretty well. I have all the panels for the top welded together. They're clecoed onto the frame, and now I'm going to install this 90-degree flange along the bottom of the rear of the top frame. I annealed just a strip that's going to get hammered over, and I'm using the framework itself that I added to the stock structure to shape the metal over. I've got it clamped really well. I've just got one section now. I need to do the entire thing very securely for this to work cleanly, but this makes it clear how this is going to work. To shape the flange around the bottom, I'm going to use a little cutie pie hammer like this. This is a plastic or nylon mallet. I could use a wooden mallet, or I could use a wooden tool hit with another hammer. So let's say you had a piece of wood that you hit with another hammer for greater accuracy, and the key to this kind of thing is to work the whole thing gradually rather than trying to do a little piece at a time all the way to 90 degrees. If you work really gradually, the whole thing will come out very cleanly. There's the flange, fully installed. Seems plausible. After I installed the flange that runs along the bottom rear edge of the top, I applied some panel adhesive to the frame and embraced my vice grip fetish and clamped it in place. I've got 4 Cleco holes to go back and weld, but I think that shouldn't create any problem, and we'll just let it solidify and see what happens. Here's the top as viewed from the underside after the panel adhesive is dried and I've removed all the vice grips. I'm going to fold the edge flange around using probably a wood mallet, maybe plastic mallet. If I need to support the underside with a dolly, I will. I'm counting on the trim adhesive, or excuse me, panel adhesive holding this really tight together, and therefore I don't think I'll need to clamp the outside with anything. If it acts like it wants to give and not give me a clean result, well then I'll just clamp it. So we'll see how this goes. So next I need to add some bolts along the back to hold it down, and a gasket, and then I'll add some windows. I plan to add one large window in the middle and another on either side at the back. So that'll be the next project.